Welcome to the Next Level Casino Careers Show, a series highlighting industry tips and insights from the best minds in the casino and hospitality industry. Enjoy the show.
Mr. Ryan Frohberg, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you, Kyle?
I'm doing well, Ryan. Once again, I just want to take a second. We were talking a little bit before the recording here, but I want to thank you. You're CMO at Casino del Sol Resort in Tucson. We'll get into that in a little bit as far as your role, a little bit about your property. But just to start, I know you're a busy individual who's, got a lot on your plate. So just once again, just thank you for taking the time and joining us today.
No, thank you for having me, Kyle.
So Ryan, we always like to start with what we call the 3-minute origin story, right? Rather than talk about your title, your bio, we'll get into that. But in your own words, give a little greater context to the audience out there. A bunch of hungry individuals, people who are wanting to go to the next level in the casino and hospitality space. But if you wouldn't mind, just connect the dots for us a little bit. Where you grew up, what your interests were, what got you in the industry, and then ultimately what you do today.
I was actually born in Michigan. I spent a lot of time traveling as part of my dad's job when I was younger. So I've lived in a lot of different places, which I think has actually helped me quite a bit in this career to be able to kind of relate to our guests from all different places around the world. But I lived in Southern California, St. Louis, Missouri, Tampa, Florida, Detroit area. I did go to Michigan State with dual degrees in accounting and finance. So, being a CMO, that's a little bit weird, but we'll get more into that later on how that actually happened. That's a very long story, but we'll shorten it up for today's podcast. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the gist of, my dad was an automotive worker. So, and worked in sales. So ultimately he had to go wherever the new plants were being opened by General Motors and Ford and Chrysler, and went and sold them automotive finishing. So that's kind of my younger days story.
Okay. So Ryan, if I'm hearing that correctly, there was a lot of traveling. It seems like you were adaptable because you moved in so many different places. So, you can relate to your team members and a lot. I think that served you well, but curious to know what ultimately got you into the casino industry. And I know it's probably a long story, but I think it's important for this audience, right? Is because you had a finance background, you ultimately end up CMO. But kind of take us through those early days. How did you get into the industry? What was your headspace and mindset at the time? And then, what were some of the key stops that made you maybe pivot towards marketing?
So I think a lot of it goes back to college. When I was at Michigan State, I actually was a general business major going into like my sophomore, junior year of college. And I took the first couple intro classes in business. So I took, econ and marketing like they weren't 101, but the equivalent of like a 101 marketing class, 101 econ, 101 accounting. And I was accounting and finance came really, really easy to me. I've been really good with numbers my whole life. Those are pretty straightforward subjects as far as, the rules are the rules. And, I did very well in them. So, I think part of me at that time wasn't mature enough, and I took the easy route, which was to do something that I was really good at and get a really good grade point average. And looking back on it, probably wasn't the best decision, but honestly, it all kind of did work out. And I think that background has really served me well in my career. So I'm not disappointed that I did it. I just, definitely took the easy route out. I got a job with Deloitte right out of college. And I like to affectionately call Deloitte & Touche what it was called at the time. It's now just Deloitte, but the human chop shop. And so what they do is they basically just take a lot of first year college grads and work you until your fingers bleed and your eyes are bugging out of your head. Was completely miserable, hated every minute of that job. Decided to go into private accounting and finance, hated that even more. And then tried one last chance to use my degree and came out to Tucson, Arizona, and worked in public accounting again for a much smaller accounting firm, thinking that it would be better. Was not better, was actually, again, worse. And basically quit that job and worked as a bartender and server at a family-run restaurant, and kind of was floating, not really knowing what I was going to do with my life. And somebody gave me a book called Whale Hunt in the Desert by Steve Sear, and he was a casino host in Las Vegas for the Las Vegas Hilton. It is one of the funniest books I've ever read. I've actually met the guy as well. If he's watching, I feel bad saying this, but be careful to meet the people that you really like in a book is all I'm going to say to the general public. But he is an excellent writer, and he wrote an excellent book that was very interesting and just got me very curious as to what it was like working in a casino. So it just so happened I opened the paper one day at my parents' house when I was over there visiting on a Sunday, reading the Sunday paper, and there was a job fair for Desert Diamond. And I decided, why not? Showed up to the job fair, wanted to be a casino host, was told I did not qualify for being a casino host. Didn't really care because, again, it wasn't money at that point in my life that was driving me to look for a career. It was more of trying to find something that I would enjoy. So I asked them what I'd be qualified for, and they said Players Club rep. They asked me if I wanted to know how much it paid, and I said absolutely not, because the only thing that's going to do is make me say no. So I took a job making $9.88 an hour working at the Players Club at Desert Diamond, and harassed the player development manager every single day that I worked there to give me a shot at being a host. So that's kind of how it all started, and really probably the best decision I ever made in my career was made that day. And that's kind of what drew me in, was just reading a book that I found very entertaining and thought that it sounded a lot better than working behind a computer all day long, staring at spreadsheets.
So did you kind of know that? Because I guess what I want to ask is, at its core, what did you find in the casino industry that obviously has kept you there, has kept you motivated, versus you kind of did a great job of explaining your natural kind of superpower was accounting, finance. As you said, that was kind of boring to you because that was your natural strong suit. So what was it about this industry that kind of has obviously kept you hooked, kept you motivated, kept you passionate, versus what you were getting in those other jobs?
I mean, it's definitely the customers. So, when I was in accounting and finance, we did a little bit of sales, but even the sales in accounting and finance is pretty dry and not that interesting. It's very professional, very buttoned up. There's not a whole lot of, different types of individuals that you encounter. Everybody's pretty similar. Everybody's different. We all know that, but accounting and finance people have a tendency to be very similar. And when I got into the casino business, I waited tables and bartended all through college. I told you after I quit accounting and finance, I waited tables and bartending. And I just kind of realized one day that I am a much happier individual when I'm bartending or serving than I was when I was behind a spreadsheet in my office for 12 hours a day, staring at a computer screen. But I also realized without, an extreme amount of luck, serving and bartending is not really a place where I could grow a career. I'd have to run into the right restaurateur at the right time in the right market, and I probably have to move around a lot if I wanted to do that full time. Which, those were things that I wasn't really interested in. I liked Tucson. My grandfather was here, and he was kind of my role model when I was younger. Obviously your parents are always your role models as well, but my grandfather was like, the non-parental influence in my life that I really enjoyed talking to. He was a sales guy as well. And so I really wanted to stick around in Tucson for at least a little while. I assumed back then that, when my grandfather ultimately passed away, that I'd be moving out of Tucson and going somewhere else. But that didn't happen. Obviously I'm still here. He passed away about 9 years ago, I believe, about 9 years ago. So it's been a while. But yeah, I kind of looked at like, that's what I like doing. And when I got to work on the casino floor, I realized that was a career that was a potential for me that was a lot like serving and bartending, but with a lot more opportunity, meaning there was a million different ways my career could go at that point, whether it meant going into the gaming operations side or, further into the marketing side from the Players Club and casino hosting.
Ryan, if you don't mind me asking, because something that gets brought up a lot from guests and, people who email us is mentors and early influences. So your grandfather, if you had to boil it down, if there's one key thing you learned from your grandfather, what would that thing be?
Well, I'll share one story. My grandfather was a pretty special individual. When I was younger, especially when we lived in Orange County, it's not very far from Tucson. It's a quick drive over. So in order, I think, to get myself out of my parents' hair, they would send me to Tucson during the summer when I was off of school for a little while, and I got to spend a lot of time with him and my grandmother. And I wanted to stay up, later. I didn't want to have as early of a bedtime. So my grandfather set a time for me to give a presentation as to what the benefits and negatives of me staying up later would be for both himself and for myself. So I think, that definitely, those kind of influences definitely help to keep yourself, to keep me at least, I think, kind of able to do things on the fly, and allowed me to grow, like when I was much younger than I probably even should have. Had to do something like that. But, I just think that was part of it. And obviously, since I've been in the business, and again, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I've had some really just special people around me that I have to thank, because ultimately where I stand today is a lot because of the people that were around me as I was getting started in this industry.
Do you have that presentation that you put together?
I do not, because it was an oral presentation. I didn't have to do visuals or anything. Pre laptop days, pre PowerPoint days. So I didn't have to do a PowerPoint or anything. But the reason why I ultimately came to a solution where it was kind of in between what I wanted and what they wanted. So I was able to get a later bedtime. My grandfather made it a point to tell me that the reason why he was granting me what I wanted a little bit later bedtime was because I did bring up all the negatives to what my decision would ultimately result in. So, he appreciated the honesty of my presentation.
How to, that's such an essential life skill, right? I mean, that's brilliant. How to put together an argument, right? And weigh it from both sides and really understand what you're trying to pitch. So that is amazing. That's one of the better stories I've heard. And I could see why your grandfather was such an influence on you. So Ryan, I think that's a perfect segue. And then we'll talk a little bit about your last 10 years, because it's an interesting story, right? Going from, guest services, player development, all the way to CMO. But if you wouldn't mind, kind of let our viewers know a little bit about your property and your role now, and then we'll connect the dots. So if you wouldn't mind talking about your property there in Tucson, what are some of the key differentiators, and ultimately your role as CMO?
Ultimately, we have a full service property. We're not the biggest casino on the face of the planet, but we're certainly not small. Part of what has probably made me stay here, we all have opportunities to go do different things at times. But the biggest draw to me of staying here is, beyond the people who are amazing and the tribe who is just phenomenal, and the support they give their team members is just incredible. And you don't see it very often. I know you work for another property that's very similar. There's a few of us out there. And I think that's, part of the reason why I've stayed as long as I have, is because how great they are. But ultimately it's the amount of work that we have to accomplish here, because we have, a 5,000 seat amphitheater, a golf course, a gas station, 2 hotels, 2 properties, about to be a 3rd property. And marketing here is in charge of all of it, which I think is just, again, to keep me not bored, as I talked about in my accounting and finance days. Just the sheer volume of stuff that comes across my desk is, having to pivot from, should we book Old Dominion to, what's happening in Tier 13 in our local database, is kind of what keeps me interested, because it's just never a dull day. It's just a lot of different things going on. And I wouldn't want it any other way to be in charge of all of those different areas. Because again, I get to play, CMO of an entertainment company and CMO of a database company in the same day, which is really exciting. And I think it's a lot, not just me, but it's the reason why a lot of people stick around here, is because there's just so much variety in our day, and it keeps you on your toes. It's a lot of work, but honestly, a lot of work is what I want, like that makes life more interesting.
Yeah, that's such a key perspective too. And I feel like, anytime you have someone who's young in their career, maybe they're entering the industry, to really stress that, right? Because for some individuals, that's where their energy comes from. Like, I want to be in a fast-paced environment. Like, I want the day to go fast. Like, I want to be involved with everything that is the casino and hospitality industry. But to some, that might be, I'm sure you've had those conversations. I feel like every meeting I'm on, hey, how are you doing? Oh, busy. It's just like, that's just the way, you know what I mean? So like, I've changed my framework of even saying that, because it's like, that's kind of what the gig, that's what we signed up for. I feel like sometimes in our industry, we're in the busy Olympics. It's like, it's not a competition, right? We're all busy here. And I think that's key from a career perspective, is understanding that, right? And some people get energy from that and some don't. Brian, within 10 years, give or take, I think less than 10 years, you went from getting in the industry and now you're the CMO. I think your perspective is valuable. Like, what made that possible from that journey, from working in guest services to PD to CMO?
I think, number one, the most important thing, I think, in anyone's careers is to surround yourself with good mentors. And ultimately, I got very, very lucky in the fact that when I did get promoted at Desert Diamond to casino host, I got promoted right before a person decided to leave. So, I started out probably 6 months of casino hosting with no boss. Didn't have anybody in charge of the department, kind of did my own thing. And I got extremely lucky that the people that were in leadership positions at Desert Diamond decided to hire a guy named Glenn Vishengrad out of Vegas to come in, and just, the amount of attention and the amount of conversations that we had and the amount of learning that I did from him was just instrumental. He actually works for me now here at Casino del Sol. He always joked around that one day I'm going to work for you. And I would always laugh because I didn't think he was being serious, but here we go. It does come full circle, and I'm extremely proud to even have him on my team now. And then when I went to, interview over it, I wanted to take the next step in my career. I loved being a casino host, but I knew that ultimately wasn't going to make me happy doing that for 30, 40 years. So I saw an opportunity presented itself over at Casino del Sol to be an executive host. And, we have more things here than, my previous employer did. So I thought that would be a good opportunity for my career to be able to see what it was like to work in a full, resort level experience as a casino host. I got to my interview in March of 2012 with Michael Glosser and Steve Neely. And, I presented how I plan all of my customers. So I talked a lot about data and database stuff, and talked about how I look at all the data from my players, and I keep, all of I have plans, business plans for every single individual customer. And a lot of those are things that I learned from Glenn at Desert Diamond. And both of them kind of looked at each other and said, this guy's not a casino host. No offense to casino hosts, but they're like, most casino hosts are, not thinking strategically like that. We need him in a different role. So I was disappointed I did not get the executive host job. However, a couple months later, Michael called me and said that they're creating a new department called VIP Services, and they would love for me to be the manager of said department. And so by the time that I started, Steve Neely had already left, and Michael was my direct report. And we basically got to develop this department from scratch, which allowed me to soak in all of the things that Michael learned at the Flamingo back in the day in Vegas, and just was a sponge for everything that I could possibly learn from him. And he was an unbelievable mentor. Again, full circle, he now is our account rep for our agency. So he technically works for me as well. So that was really good to be around somebody like that. And then, again, just sheer luck. Steve Neely decided to come back when we had an opening for chief marketing officer. And then I got a totally new perspective on things and got to learn from another great marketer in Steve Neely. And then, he spent a couple of years with me here, and I got to soak in all the things that I could learn from him. And when he left, I got promoted to the CMO gig, and I have an unbelievable mentor in my CEO, Kim Van Amberg, who's just a totally different type of person, not a marketer, a lawyer actually by trade. But she's just an amazing leader, and just, seeing her and the way that she conducts herself around everyone has just been, again, it seems like, a lot of luck, but I always look at like luck is you have to put yourself in a situation to take advantage of it. And by that, I mean, you have to be willing to learn from the people. When you get lucky and you get somebody, they hire somebody like Steve Neely to work right above you, you have to learn from an individual like that. And, I owe a ton of my career to him, and I really owe my career to all the people that have been around me, going, again, all the way back to my grandfather. The other thing that I always, pride myself on is I've learned a ton from my own employees. I don't know everything. I never will. There's a lot of things that I don't truly understand. I think the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything. And so, like, being able to trust the individuals around me has been extremely helpful. I have an unbelievable team here with, Teresa Miraz in charge of my entertainment department, and Jessica in charge of my marketing department, and Tim in charge of my local player development department. And having the ability to hire a guy like Glenn to run my national marketing department has just makes my job a lot easier when I have people around that I can trust and that I can learn from.
Ryan, there's so many good notes I wrote down there, but something I kind of wrote over and over was this sense of, you've viewed every relationship as an opportunity to learn. And I'm just wondering if you could provide a little more context on what that looks like, right? Because as your career progressed, because obviously you weren't just a solo person, but obviously there's team dynamics there. So for those who want to take their career to the next level or looking for, something different, is there any advice you would give as it relates to creating those contexts and, really being that sponge, and any words of wisdom relates to what worked for you to kind of grow your network and learn from these individuals?
I mean, I'd make sure that, I think the biggest thing is being comfortable. Hold on one second. Sorry. Being comfortable in hearing things that maybe aren't the most flattering to yourself. Every single one of those people that I just mentioned called me out on multiple things that I did that were stupid or, not the right thing to do at the time. And they all saw something in me or whatever, as far as talent goes. And they just knew that I needed maybe a little bit of polishing. And again, that kind of makes sense because I didn't really start my career in marketing. I didn't grow up to be this. That wasn't my original goal in life, was to be CMO at a casino. I never knew that I would get here. I never even thought about casinos until mid to late 20s. And so surrounding yourself with people that are going to be brutally honest, I think, is really important. You have to be able to hear negative things about yourself in order to grow, I think. My mistakes or whatever are what made me who I am today, more than my successes. I mean, it's easy when you're being successful. You don't learn much, honestly, when you're successful. You do something, it goes great, and you're like, okay, well, that was good, but what did you learn? Not really that much. You learn a lot more when you're, a failure, I think, at things. And allowing people to point out failure, I think, is really important. I made sure to not surround myself with a bunch of people that were just going to tell me yes all the time.
Yeah. And also too, I'm curious to know your thoughts here, because that was a short time, right? It seems like you went from guest services to player development, I think, to database marketing, to what makes casino marketing so unique is, right, all the different aspects of marketing, right? When you say the word marketing, most people just think of like advertising or whatever. Like, there's so many different core components within casino marketing. But I guess what I'm getting at is, you did a lot of pivots and you worked for different areas of marketing within casino marketing. How did you go about building trust, right? Because as you would make that change, you were relatively new. So if you were jumping over to database marketing, or is it your first time being a PD host or whatever, kind of those core shifts within your career, how did you go about earning trust and respect as you were kind of within a new vertical, if that makes sense?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that when I was in the previous roles, I didn't ignore the other roles. And what I mean by that is, you know, clearly, like when I was in player development, we had a lot of marketing team meetings, and I got to, you know, observe and see what the database people were doing, what the promotions people were doing, what the advertising people were doing. And, you know, it would have been very easy, I think, in those meetings to just kind of ignore what they were doing and only kind of worry about my area. But, you know, being in PD, I think people that are in PD, like the most important thing in player development, as far as management goes, is kind of understanding what else is going on, because all of those things ultimately affect the VIP level customer anyways. So if you don't know what's going on in database and you're a PD manager, you're doing a disservice to your player development team, because you kind of need to have input and be aware of what they're doing, because ultimately what they're doing, you know, can make your job either infinitely harder or infinitely easier. So that helped a lot, just being involved and kind of, you know, not necessarily, you know, probably sometimes sharing my opinion when it wasn't wanted. But, you know, ultimately to be involved, you have to be able to do that from time to time. And so that helped a lot. And then obviously with the database side of things, my background in accounting and finance was huge, because we all know that database data is king, you know, and it ultimately comes down to being able to read the data, understand the data. So I had a huge head start in the fact that I could see a report and already know how to read it. So now I just needed to figure out, okay, now what do you do with it when you're a database manager in a casino? So that allowed me to get a much bigger head start than maybe somebody else in my role wouldn't have had. I didn't have to. And same thing when I became a CMO. I didn't have to sit down with the CFO and learn how to read a financial statement. You know, in my previous life, I made them myself, so I kind of understood what they all, you know, it wasn't foreign to me. I didn't have to like learn a new language. I just already knew that part of it. So it allowed me to focus on growing in the role rather than learning the basics of the role.
Yeah, no, that's great. And if I'm hearing you correctly too, it's about understanding, you know, if you're looking at the whole marketing puzzle, understanding every department, every individual's role, and it shouldn't be a surprise, right? So as you're kind of progressing in your career, you've already had those conversations. You've already understood, you know, kind of the background there, and that's helped you. And I love that nugget too about, you know, because someone who worked on the advertising side for a long time is, you know, we could put it in the mailer, we could put it in an email blast, but if your casino hosts and, you know, your team doesn't know about it, that's a personal interaction. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the best interaction as far as understanding everything that you have going on from a marketing perspective that drives revenue. Otherwise, we're missing the boat. Just because you put it on a piece of paper or on a digital ad doesn't mean that they saw it, you know?
Yeah. And I ultimately, being a casino host back in the day and being in casino sales and working on the floor, the other thing I think that it teaches a person is there are people that you're sending that mailer to, and they like certain things and they don't like other things. So, you know, being able to see how, you know, in my previous roles, what that company did, what the customers liked and did not like, and really more importantly, what the good customers liked and what they didn't like, was really important. And, you know, it ultimately made me a much better database manager, and it makes me an infinitely better CMO to know, to have those personal interactions with the customers. I actually, you know, make it a point to go down on the floor as much as I possibly can. I wish it was more, because ultimately that's where I learn the most, is from the customers, because they're ultimately what make or break our business. You know, they're the most important people. And I saw how that, you know, a change in database would impact the players and the frontline team members. And I think, to go back on your trust thing, I think one of the biggest things, again, that I learned from my mentors and that I learned through experience, and I learned watching my mentors also do this, was when you make a mistake is to own it. You know, don't throw other people under the, even if other people, you know, had some sort of role in the mistake. It's better to own the mistake yourself, because that's what builds trust, is when people know, you know, you're going to sit there and you're going to own a mistake, and you're not going to throw your team member under the bus, and you're not going to throw your employee under the bus, and you're not going to, you know, point fingers at every single person every time something goes wrong, I think is really important. And, it's something that I felt as an employee was really important with my bosses. And I needed to surround myself with people like that, because it makes it a much more enjoyable experience on the team when your boss takes ownership of things when things aren't good. There's nothing more frustrating, and I had this in previous jobs, never in the casino industry, but there's nothing more frustrating than when you have a boss that takes credit when everything is good and places blame on the team when everything is bad. Like that's not a team, and that makes you not want to do your job.
Yeah, and I do the parallel of sports too, right? Like if you think of like the best players or even coaches for that matter, they do exactly that, right? Like they highlight the team when it's successes, and when there's failures, the buck stops with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're 100% correct. That creates trust, and especially early in your career, right? When you see your supervisor, your mentor, take that accountability and then maybe coach you privately, that goes so much further. So I totally agree with you there. Ryan, want to pivot here a little bit. 2023 just started. Over the course of you being in this industry, the CMO there, broad question, take it where you want. But as we look forward, what are the biggest changes? And obviously the last 3 years have been, hyperspeed on changes, but just in general, what you've observed working in the industry, what has changed since you first started? And ultimately, what gets you excited for the future as you think about this year and beyond?
I mean, the good news in our world is I think what works will always work. And what I mean by that is customers want what they want. They want a good experience. They want to enjoy their time when they're here. I mean, it's the hospitality industry that will never change. What I think makes me excited is the fact that all of these tools and things that we see out there, all of these different, whether it goes to public database records and being able to use that information to acquire better customers. That's what excites me, utilizing mobile technology for our hosts in order to get all of the tasks that take time away from the customer and make that less, so that there is more time with the customer, because ultimately that's what makes our guests experience better. So I think it's just a matter of, with all the different stuff that we have out there that keeps hitting the market, and just the ability for me to do different things that I couldn't do, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, just makes it exciting. We just launched a host app with our team here, and they can comp from, anywhere. They can be, I hope they don't do this, but they could be in their car and they could comp their customer to the, I hope they pull over and do it. But the point being is that, it now reduces the amount of time they have to spend on the menial tasks and allows them to focus on what's really important, which is the relationship with our customers. And so ultimately, I think like that's what excites me more than anything in our world is, I felt like when I first started in the casino business, it was kind of weird because there were a lot of things we did at Deloitte, or I saw clients at Deloitte doing, that I got to the casino industry and they were all very manual and there wasn't a whole lot of technology behind things. And I thought, God, this industry is like 25 years behind. And I feel like we're starting to catch up. I don't think we're all the way there, but I'll never think that way. I always want to be on the cutting edge, and, that's not always the best decision, by the way. So don't always be on the cutting edge, but you don't have to be first, but you probably shouldn't be 10th either.
Yeah, no, for sure. And actually, that's a perfect segue into, this is a segment here we call the bigger picture, where I'll show just a couple slides and we just kind of riff on what that picture is. So my slide here, I'm going to jump to slide 3, which is that, player development product you're talking about. So it doesn't have to be specifically this product, but it seems like you have an innate capability to be able to understand data and utilize it and turn that insight into action. But more importantly, looking at it from a technology perspective in general, how do you go about weighing the pros and cons of, yes, this technology is right? Because to your point, you might not want to be the first to enter. You want to make sure that you have that, does this actually drive value for the customer or the guest or whatever it may be? But just how do you go about from looking, inspecting, understanding what technology you might want to bring on, and then ultimately just I guess the backside of that would be looking at the results and utilizing it, because there's so, I mean, you watch G2E, right? There's so many different technologies and vendors reaching out to you, and you only have so many resources and so much time. So kind of how do you go about the strategy of implementing technology that's right for you?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I think it's really important to not do too much. And what I mean by that is when you try to, and again, this is coming from mistakes that I've made in the past. So, this isn't something that I'm speaking of without any experience. But when you try and launch too many things at once, your focus isn't on the thing and making whatever it is that you are launching better, and where it needs to be. So you wind up with a lot of just average stuff if you try and do too much at once. It's about focusing on each individual thing and making it the best possible solution for whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And I think just like the people that develop the technology, it's really important to look at what's the goal. I mean, what are you really trying to do first? And then figure out what technology gets you to the goal, rather than starting with the technology and then thinking about what goals could be accomplished with it. Probably not the right way to look at it. What ultimately it's about being aware of what your team needs. What are they clamoring for? What do they want? So it's a lot of different conversations. This started with, just tons of conversations I've had with my hosts. And ultimately this isn't our first foray into trying to get a mobile host product. There was failures along the line that existed. We tried to do our own thing. It didn't work. We tried to, go with another company. It didn't work. So it happens. It's trial and error. You try and figure out how to, again, much like I talked about with surrounding yourself with good mentors, it's also surrounding yourself with good partners. Who's going to help my company grow to the point where I need it to be? And ultimately with this program specifically, but not just this one, but other ones, I try to seek people outside of the casino industry. A lot of times I pitch some of the old school casino guys, some of the things that we've done in the past, and a lot of comments come, well, this person doesn't have any casino experience. And then I look around the table at all of the people that are sitting there on the other side of the vendor. And I say, guys, if we're really looking for more casino experience when we have 176 years on this side of the table, that's not necessarily a good thing. We should have that covered. We have the casino experience covered on this side of the table. What we need is a tool that's going to help us use our experience to help our customer, or to help our team member help our customer. We don't need more experience. We need a better product in order for our team to use their experience. So that, I think that was kind of my biggest thing with technology and partners that I look for are people that are willing to think creatively and ultimately, again, be open to, this is my problem. Can you help me solve it? And then work backwards. And I've been in a lot of different pitches with technology where they're telling you all of the things that their product does. And they're not really talking about the problems that their product solves. And that's, why do I don't need anything, it kind of goes back to like, if I need to do a bunch of math, I need a calculator. Because it can help me do the math. I don't need some other tool that doesn't do any of those things. Like I don't need a ruler, I need a calculator. So it's really about the problem. And I try and find partners that talk about issues, that talk about problems, talk about how there's these problems and this product solves those problems, rather than, oh, look at all the neat things this product can do.
Yeah. You said so many good things there. I wrote down a couple notes here, like start with the end in mind, right? I think it's Stephen Covey who talks about that. So any journey you're on, whether it's technology or whatever, like understand your end point and then build backwards. And then I love that you spoke to like the heart of innovation. Most of the time it's off of another industry, right? And it's utilizing something and utilizing it within your space. And I think we can all, the listeners out there can relate, have been in those meetings where people will be like, well, no, they don't have any casino experience, or they haven't worked with anyone within the casino. They don't get it. And what's a common theme when I talk to people on the show, it's kind of like, well, maybe that's where the opportunity is. It's an opportunity for us. Like, why would we need to have so many different people in the casino space understanding you want a compliant product, et cetera, but there's opportunity within that as well.
Yeah, I mean, some of the greatest inventions in mankind were invented for something that they didn't ultimately do.
Right.
Somebody realized, oh my God, that thing could do this other thing too. So it's just kind of one of those things like that. I'm pretty sure nobody ever, when the first computers existed, and my dad tells me the stories of bringing all the punch cards to the computer that was the size of a room. I doubt anybody back then was thinking that the computer would be in cars to help, allow them to get better gas mileage or to be safer. But one day somebody went into the IT space that was in automotive and said, we could probably make that smaller and put it in a car and it would be great.
Right.
So those are, again, those are the things that, and again, I owe this to my mentors because that's kind of how they taught me to think, and how, we had back and forth all the time discussing different things. And, now I have those same conversations with my partners, is that we don't necessarily always start with the product. We just riff and talk about the problems. And then over time, both of us work together and develop solutions to those problems. But you can't do that without having a conversation first.
Yep, 100%. My next picture here, and for those who are listening via podcast, highly recommend you go to nextlevelcasinocareers.com. But it's an image here from USA Today's 10 Best, where Casino del Sol was ranked number 8 in the country for best casino hotel. So I guess, what does this mean for, something like this, right? You guys, I think, were the highest ranked in Arizona. So when you start to get these kind of awards and this kind of recognition, what does it do just for the morale of your team, your property in general?
Well, I mean, it's huge because it ultimately validates, all of the hard work that they do, and all the effort and all the pain, sometimes that comes with improving yourself and improving your product. We all know that this isn't easy work. There's a lot of different people that have to do their jobs correctly in order to get to where we need to get to. But this is, again, just validation for all of that pushing and effort and, all the things that people do in order to, it's hard work to do it every day. I know that from being on the floor. There are days where you just, don't want to deal with it. And you push through, and this is validation of those efforts, like getting awards like this. Personally, I don't care about them, it's not something that I just want to do the best job we possibly can. But what this does is shows that there's somebody out there that recognizes all the work that my team did in order to make this happen. So in that respect, it is special. We don't go out of our way to try and get them, but it is nice to see my team get some recognition, especially, again, the frontline staff. It's really important for us to be able to have these conversations like, what you're doing is special. It's not, and people see it. It's not like when you wake up in the morning, you don't want to come to work, and you do a great job. This is somebody telling you that, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And kudos to you and your team there. This is a huge honor, and yeah, you're 100% right. It's validation for, the unique product and service that you guys have to be the highest ranked in Arizona. So
congrats. Yeah. And ultimately, I think the CMO in me or whatever looks at this, and like, I look at it as opportunity to do more, and what I mean by that is now I have something to use to market with, to different level of customer. So, one of the things that I really wanted to do here, and that we've just started doing, is market nationally. And obviously, being in Tucson, I told you we're not the biggest casino in the world. So our budgets are limited. Like, I can't just go into Chicago and run TV ads in Chicago. It's just not going to work. But what this does is gives me something to tell people in Chicago of why they should fly to Tucson and not fly to Las Vegas, or not fly to, or not, go to wherever, not go to Atlantic City, or not go down to Biloxi, Mississippi, or wherever they were thinking of going. This is something I can use as a tool to get them to come out here.
Yeah, absolutely. It breaks the clutter and gives a sense of accreditation that a catchy headline or something wouldn't be able to do. So yeah, absolutely. Ryan, the last picture I have here is of your amphitheater. And I'm just curious to know, this looks like such a unique space. I looked at your past acts. You've had Brad Paisley, Ice Cube. You've done a whole plethora of just different variations of entertainment. So high level, kind of what has this space done for you guys, and how has it helped, kind of drive revenue in the things that you're trying to do there in there in Tucson?
Well, ultimately anybody that has a big theater or amphitheater or venue knows it's very, very difficult to make money on entertainment. Every year, it seems every artist wants 20-30% more. So it's very, very difficult. But what it does do is it introduces our brand to a whole new customer base. And we talk a lot about, I hear it not as much anymore, thank God, but used to hear a ton about how to market to millennials and all this stuff. Like millennials are different, like an alien. And it always cracked me up because I'm like, I'm right on the edge. I'm kind of in between Gen X and millennial. I act way more like a millennial than I do like a Gen Xer. When you look at it, like, again, when you look at it, like all of these people are the same, which is totally bonkers that we even think that way. But when you just list out the things that people think of when they hear the word millennial, most of those things are me, so it always used to crack me up because they'd be like, we have a millennial problem. And I was always like, no, we don't. And they're like, well, yes, we do. Like the millennials don't play nearly as much as the boomers. And I'll be like, well, why would they? Like, no millennial has 4 hours to sit in front of a slot machine and just pump money into. Like, that's just not the way. That's not where their life cycle is. It has nothing to do with how old they are. It has everything to do with where their life is right now. So what this does is just allows us to, get entry into the younger person market. So when they are ready to maybe go gamble a little bit, we're there and they already know us. And then ultimately we have been able to make it profitable, but it takes a lot of work. It's just, people always ask me, like, how do you make your entertainment more profitable? And I said, you have to make no be your favorite word. Almost everything there's so many more no's when it comes to entertainment than there is yeses. And it's a lot of effort. It's a ton of effort. And again, I just give a ton of credit to my entertainment team because they're on board with it. They do the same thing, which is no, 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 to get to a yes. There's so many acts that we pass on that would be phenomenal probably in your market. But in our market, it just doesn't make any sense. All markets are different. And, people will go, well, they sold out, wherever, Hollywood Bowl. And I'm like, well, we're not in Hollywood. So I don't know why that's relevant to me. What works here might not work there, and what works there might not work here. And ultimately we had to make a decision to pivot a while back, and we had to go bigger or go home. And that was kind of what I mean by that is we used to do a lot of the traditional tired casino acts, but it's a 5,000 seat amphitheater with a 1,100 slot machine casino next to it. I don't need 5,000 slot players to show up to my casino event, at my entertainment event at AVA. The math does not work. Last I checked, 5,000 divided by 1,100 is more than one. And while the show's going on, there's already 400 people at the slots. So I need at most 700 people to come gamble. I don't need 5,000. If I have 5,000, the experience goes down for everyone. So we've treated it separate, but it's still part of our brand and our casino. Meaning that I don't necessarily look for acts that are going to be great at driving a bunch of casino customers. I look at acts that are going to fill 5,000 seats, knowing that if I do that, there's going to be 500 of them. And again, going back to my VIP days, you cannot get a person who likes slot machines, you can see in the picture, that close to a casino and not have them walk in the door. Again, some of my family members are gamblers. I know how they operate. You get them that close to a casino, they are going in the casino no matter what. There's nothing you need to do to entice them to go into the casino. There's nothing you need to do in order to market to them while they're at the venue, other than just let them know what's going on next door. So, I love the venue. It's phenomenal. It allows us to do some big acts. It's just big enough to get some big acts, and it's just small enough to not have to get only huge acts, if you know what I mean. Like I don't have to go out and get, BTS to come do 5 shows. I don't need to, worry about only dealing with Live Nation. I get to do a little bit. We get to be a little creative because it's just small enough to be creative, but it's just big enough to be able to do some acts which are some higher level and not hemorrhage cash.
Yeah. And I imagine it gives you the ultimate flexibility too, right? And I totally hear you. I'm sure people listening can relate. Entertainment, it's a lot of trial and error and learning and adaptability, and the no's you speak about so eloquently. It's all part of it. But, and I love your point too about, a casino gamer, as long as you drive value, whether that's entertainment or something near the premise, they're going to go, they're going to visit, right? And especially on top of that, if you have great guest service levels like you guys have, it's just a win-win on so many different levels. And man, we could probably talk another hour as it relates to generations and assumptions as it relates to the gaming experience. We'll save that for another day. But yeah, you're 100% right. I had a good conversation with Hector Fernandez from Aristocrat where we talked about that, right? Because I remember G2E from like 2014 all the way through like 2018. It was like, the product's got to change. It's got to be a video game. It's got to be an arcade style and like all this stuff. And to your point, I think looking back, I think we made assumptions a little too fast. Not to say the product shouldn't innovate. Yes, it should. But yeah, there was just a lot of statements out there saying millennials are not going to gamble and all this stuff. And I think that's been proven to be wrong on a lot of levels.
No, I mean, in 2014, you could take, all 25-year-olds in the country. And if you added up their total gaming revenue, I guarantee that number was 1,000 times higher than 25-year-olds when boomers were 25. So the reality of it being a problem was not true. I'm like, number one, it's comparative. Like 25-year-olds in general have less money. They have a lot more things going on than people in their 60s do. So they don't have as much time and they don't have as much money. And if they don't have as much time and money, then, we all know that that's what the casino's looking for is time and money. So, like our product isn't really as interesting to them now as it will be in the future, but they clearly like it. It's just they don't have the time or money for it necessarily. And as to your point, always innovate. And I always thought that it was strange that we tout ourselves as data people. And yet here we are having conversations on anecdotes and not data. I'm like, so skill-based gaming, okay, well, that's great. But what does it do when it's on the floor? Put it on the floor and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, then the data shows you it's not a valid product. And if the data shows you that it's the most popular product in the world, then it clearly works. So instead of worrying about stuff, try something and see what happens.
Yep, absolutely. Ryan, just a couple more final questions here, more kind of quick nature. If you had to simplify it, building a great culture within a team takes what? What would you say there?
Self-accountability. And what I mean, it starts with the leader of the team being accountable to them, to their self. But ultimately, like in a perfect world, you have a team that holds each individual member of that team holds themselves accountable to themselves, first and foremost. And I know that's, getting there is the difficult part, but that's really what it all boils down to, is that when people are disappointed in themselves, when they make errors or do something wrong or don't work hard enough or in their minds, ultimately that's what matters. And the one thing that I pushed more than anything is, again, based on my my former career and the amount of work that I did when I first got into the gaming industry, is I don't want anybody to ever have to do that. And what I mean by that is I stress to my team members that their lives outside of work are more important than their lives inside of work. We are not saving people's lives. Nobody's going to die if we make a mistake. So it's okay. It doesn't mean that we want to go out and make a bunch of mistakes, but the point being is that take yourself a little bit less seriously at work and really focus on making sure that you have a strong out of work life, and you'll probably be a better worker in the long run. Because as somebody who, when I was in accounting, had no out of work life, that was a big reason why I was so miserable personally, and ultimately it led for me not to be successful at my job. Because if you're not happy when you go home, you're not happy when you're at work. Certainly. My grandfather always used to tell me, he's like, if you loved your job, so if you loved it, you would do it for free. And last I checked, if we stopped paying everybody here, you might have 4 or 5 people out of our 1,600 employees actually show up. So that shows me that it's not love. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy your job for a job. That you absolutely want that. You want to love your job compared to other jobs, but you really need to love your life, and then your job takes care of itself.
No, I love that. So perfect follow-up question. How do you, because earlier in your career, you said you were not great at that as far as work-life balance, and you're the CMO. So I don't think it's a perfect, you work 8 hours and you're off 8 hours, but like, how do you approach, so understand you try to give your team the flexibility and let them understand that your life's important, right? But how do you kind of disconnect yourself?
I learned, when I was a host, it was the worst because, I had 1,200 people on my guest list, and they all thought that I was their best friend. So like my phone just never stopped ringing, and I answered it a lot, way more than I should. And again, that was probably a tipping point in my career where, I could see this casino, as much as I liked it, turning into what my accounting life was like, meaning that was consuming me, personally. So one of the things I do now is, there's times that I make sure that I don't answer the phone, no matter who it is. It does not matter. If it's really important to leave a voicemail, I make sure to check my voicemails every once in a while. I make sure to check my emails every once in a while, but I don't live on this anymore. And I think that I try and teach that to my team too, is that, if somebody leaves you an email, you don't have to respond in 5 minutes. If it was super important, they'd call you. Now, that being said, if I'm in my house and my phone rings 15 times in a row, even though it might be a time where I'm like, I'm not going to answer the phone, I probably start to look and see who it was that was calling me so many times, because I don't know what's going on. But there's ways to like kind of distance yourself from the job. So I make sure to, one of the things that my wife and I do is we like to hike. So we go into the mountains where there's absolutely zero cell coverage. So even if I was tempted, there's nothing that can be done. It doesn't go through. So that's a way to do it. We like to go to, Southeast Asia a lot. She's Filipino. So I go visit her family, and we go to Thailand and Singapore and Malaysia. And again, it's a real easy way to say, I didn't get your call because it didn't go through. So it's important, I think, again, to just make sure, because I think of my job as really important. And I think of the people on my team as really important, but sometimes it's good to just remember, like, if something doesn't happen, nobody's going to die. And, that it's okay. Like what we do is extremely important for the tribe. We give them a ton of money, and it's really, really important, but it's not, individual decisions day to day are not life and death. I'm not a brain surgeon. If I make a mistake, the guy, my patient, the casino's not going to die. It'll be okay. And we can just do it tomorrow. And that took a lot of effort on my part, because I'm not a very patient individual, and never have been.
And I'm glad that you're speaking about that too, because I feel like just in general in our industry, I'm sure you've seen them, right? The out of office messages of like, I will have limited access to email. So if you don't, like, we have to always bake in this reasoning for, we can't get right back to you,
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And I like that you're saying it's not binary, right? There's context. If someone's calling you at home, they've called once or twice, it's probably an emergency, versus every single email you get 24/7. You don't have the rapid fire response. And what's interesting too, is I had a past guest talked about, if she had to give herself advice early in her career, she said, I actually would have taken more time to respond, because sometimes I would rush things or say something that probably didn't come off right. So there is something too about just taking a minute, saying the right response versus just always having to reply automatically.
Yeah. I listened to a podcast once. I can't remember exactly who it was, but somebody had mentioned that, the key to life, and I think it was like Tim Cook from Apple. He's like, you should respond to every email you get. And I laughed, because I'm like, clearly somebody like Tim Cook doesn't understand that he has a group of people below him that are clearly filtering out what he gets. Because I just looked over, I was just checking my email just for the number, because I wanted this number. I have 11,012 unread emails right now. So if I was to read all of those, that would literally be my job. You should change my title from CMO to email reader. So Tim Cook, you're not, you're being, you're out of your element and you don't know what you're talking about when it comes to responding to every email. I can't even read every email, let alone respond to every single one.
Right. A couple final ones here. A subject you nerd out on that people may not know.
Probably like theoretical physics. I'm especially when it comes to space. Again, in the casino industry and like being a former accountant and finance guy, and I think you probably got enough of my personality throughout this podcast to understand that I'm a person that really likes to challenge myself and be in situations where I don't know anything. And so I don't think there's anything more interesting to me than like space and theoretical physics, because it's like nothing is truth. You don't know. We don't know what we don't know because we don't know yet, and so it's just like it's this never ending thing where, you never will get the right answer. And, I think part of me enjoys that because it's the mystery of, being alive, and a lot of times we know too much and it takes a lot of the mystery out. So getting, nerding out on Neil deGrasse Tyson or Michio Kaku or whatever is amazing to me, because it's just like, even these guys are like, we don't know anything, and these are like the smartest people on the face of the planet, like there's nobody that can even touch these guys as far as intelligence level. And they're like, we literally know nothing. So it's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, it's funny. The more you wrap your heads around those subjects, I think that's important because it grounds you a little bit. It's like, yeah, I don't know anything either. You know what I mean? If these people don't know anything, then I definitely don't know anything. So maybe we shouldn't take ourselves so seriously. To your point earlier, personal routine that you use that might benefit others if they were to adapt.
More than anything, I think like when I left accounting and finance and just kind of tried to rebuild my career and really my life in general, the thing that I learned is, me personally, I'm not saying everybody's different. So I think some people absolutely need like a stringent routine. But for me, I think what was better is to just eliminate most of the routine. And what I mean by that is just wake up and see where the day kind of takes you. Now, that being said, you got to have like certain things, like we have our regular meetings and we get together and talk and do our regular things. But I also like to be open enough to be able to go, you know what, let's do this. Some of the greatest things I've ever experienced in my life were completely on accident. And I think about, like, I love to travel and I love to go to places that, I don't do cruises. I'm not a good person on tours. I don't like doing tour groups. The reason why I don't like tour groups is because, like, when I went to Europe when I was in college, I was in a group and they were all like on one side of the Arc de Triomphe, the part that looks down the Champs-Elysees. And I was on the other side of the Arc de Triomphe, looking at the other side of the Arc de Triomphe. And everybody's like, why are you over there? Like, I don't understand. And I'm like, well, I've never seen this side of the Arc de Triomphe. I've seen that side of the Arc de Triomphe in a million pictures, but I have never seen what's down this road. I want to go down this road and see what's down there. And it's like, people live down there, but I wanted to see that because I was like, why would I come all this way just to look at a picture that I've already seen? So I think part of me that keeps me interested in my job and in my life is to have the standard routines, that everybody has, but make sure that I leave time for exploration and just finding out something that I didn't know about yesterday, or didn't see, something new that I didn't ever think I would even want to know.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Brian, apologies, we're going a little over here. I'm going to ask my final two questions here, but is there a personal quote or book that stands out to you that you like?
Yeah. There's a book I read in college. And again, if I probably would have lived my life more this way, I would have gotten started in this career earlier. But we're stubborn human beings in general. So I tried to smash a round peg into a square hole and it didn't work. But the book was a guy named Robert M. Pirsig. He wrote Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, probably my favorite book of all time. I think I've read it like 17 times. I'm going to get my paper here because I have to read the quotes because I don't want to misquote Mr. Pirsig. But one of them that I always stuck with me my whole life was, and again, it speaks to some things we've already talked about, but it's, you are never dedicated to something that you have complete confidence in. No one is fanatically shouting that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. When people are fanatically dedicated to political or religious faiths or any other goals, it's always because those dogmas or goals are in doubt. And so what it means is if you feel like 100% confident of something, you probably don't know what you're doing. And that again, it speaks to the not knowing what you don't know. And there was another quote in there that, again, this is more on a personal level. I think about that one more in work, but I think about this one more in my personal life, is that sometimes it's a little better to travel than it is to arrive. And what I always loved that, that idea that, the journey is the most important part. It's not the destination. It's the, don't go somewhere and go, I have to go to X, Y, and Z, and I think about this when my wife and I travel, is that, everybody thinks they go on Instagram or 25 things on TripAdvisor you have to do when you go to Y place. And I'm like, if you just are looking at it like a checklist, you're missing the whole point of even traveling in the first place, which is, if you see something on the way to something that you think you want to go to and you think that looks interesting, stop and go. Just go. Like, if it looks interesting, go, because you get the most amazing experiences in your life when you just decide to do something because you decided to do it on that particular moment. All my favorite stories about my life and things that we've done are the times where I was doing something that I didn't think I was going to be doing. And quite frankly, they were sometimes quite a bit scary, and they were probably really dumb decisions. But they also provided me with the best memories of my life.
Yeah, no, Ryan, I really appreciate this conversation. I feel like that's come full circle, right? From your career to your personal life. I feel like the moments of growth that have happened for you have really been in those moments of stepping into the unknown, kind of following that curiosity, and it's served you well. And I love that you kind of spoke to that in so many different details today. So Ryan, I want to get you out here on the final question we ask everybody, which is 3 tips if you're going to provide to somebody who, you want them to take their career to the next level. What would those 3 tips be from you?
Surround yourself with great people. They don't have to be great bosses. A lot of times you don't have choice in who your boss is, but find people. There's great people in every organization out there. Even if your boss is not a great person, go find one in your organization and talk to them and get tips from them. And that kind of rolls into the number 2 thing, which is hire great people. And I don't mean don't look at their resume and say, this is the scientifically the best person for this position. When you're interviewing them, hire for how good of a person they are. And all the rest of it will more often than not take care of itself. And ultimately just never stop being curious about everything. Again, the times in my life where I've lost track of that have been the most painful. And the times in my life where I've had the most success is when I've opened myself up to things. And whether that's other people or other ways of doing things, or just doing different things that I never would have done before, or didn't even think that I would enjoy. Try everything, just be curious all the time.
And there you have it. Ryan, CMO at Casino del Sol Resort in Tucson. Ryan, just once again, thanks for taking some time today. This is very valuable to me, and I know it was for our audience, so just appreciate it, and thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Kyle, and I hope everybody has a wonderful 2023.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Take care.
Thanks, Kyle.
Check out more episodes on nextlevelcasinocareers.com.